everyone. This video is about everything related to typography and everything you need to know about the type tool, the type menu, and any of the panels related to typography in Photoshop. So let's begin by taking a look at the actual type tool, which if you look on the toolbar, it is where there is the icon looks like a T. And if you click and hold down your mouse on that, you will see 4 different type tools on here. There is the default, which is a horizontal type tool, which in my opinion is pretty much going to always be the one that you will usually use. The other tools that you may or may not use are the vertical type tool, the vertical type mask tool, and the horizontal type mask tool. Now, the vertical type and vertical type mask tool, I would urge you not to get in the habit of using these because what they create is stacked letters, and stacked letters are a major don't in typography and design. Because when you create something where it has stacked letters, it's hard to read and it's a little awkward. I'll explain stacked letters in a minute when I show you these tools. Now, the horizontal type mask tool, what these mask tools do is essentially create an area that's selected that is in the shape of the text that you're creating. Now, things you need to consider when creating text in Photoshop are going to be involved in the options bar for text, and so we'll start with that. If I click on the text tool and click somewhere on my document, now I see people all the time creating text boxes in Photoshop, and there's no need for that. Now, to create a text box, you would simply click and drag, but I don't want to do that because that limits my space. But what you will see is that your text is going to come up. If you do a text box, it will fill it with what's called lorem ipsum text, which is placeholder text. And it's really just nonsense words that are just up there so you can see what your text typeface and style look like. Now, if I want to create text, like I said, I just want to click on the text tool and click on the document, and that should give you a cursor, and it will probably give you some placeholder text. Now, when you have this cursor, you will also notice you've created a text layer down here, which in this case it's called layer 1 right now. I'll show you more about that in a minute. But once you've created a text layer and you have the blinking cursor, at the top you can see some options for your text. And the first option, of course, is the font, which if you click on font and you have your settings set up so that you can see a preview, you can see what your styles actually look like to the right of each of these fonts. So if I'm looking for a font that's bold, usually those will stand out a little bit more because they're bold. I'm going to actually choose the font called Grow Bold. And I can also go in here, and if the font has other lettering styles available, such as italicized or bold or anything like that, you'll find that in here. In this font, all they have is regular. So I'm just going to keep it as regular. There's nothing I can really change it to other than regular. If I move to the right of that, I will see size. And rather than showing you that first, I'm going to type in the word that I'm going to work with for this, which in this case will be typography. And then I'm going to actually highlight that text and change the size. I'll show you why in a minute. I'm going to make it 72 to start. And if I highlight a certain part of that, I can change the size of just a few of the letters as well. So if I wanted to make part of the word smaller, I could. If I wanted to make it bigger, I could. I can also do this just by clicking on the icon here, the size icon, and dragging left and right. It gives you a slider that allows you to adjust manually your font size. Now the type of font I have here is called a display font. I'm going to make this all a uniform size. I'll make it 60. This is a display font. I'm going to show you a couple of other types of fonts really quick, and I'll be creating a layer for each. So I'm going to keep this at the top, and you should use display fonts sparingly. They're a little harder to read. They're fancy fonts. They're usually used to highlight something. So if you're creating a title, then it might be best to use a display font, whereas if you're writing a paragraph, you would not want to. Same thing goes with if you're using a font that's like Old English, that would be considered a display font. Another display font might be the Walt Disney logo. But display fonts might be useful in a logo design, but they are not used usually in documents or graphics where you have a lot to read. So I'm going to put this towards the top as if it's like a title. And the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to click, and I will leave this as lorem ipsum for a second, but I'm going to change the font to a serif font. And a serif font, let's find a serif font on here, a good example of one. I will do something that's fairly traditional as a serif font, which is, and I can type in here, at the top up here, I can type in the font if I know the name of it. And so I'm typing in Times New Roman, and you'll see they have the different styles already here. And I can also go in here and adjust it from there. So if I want bold italic, I can do that, and so on. So I'm going to type in serif. And usually when you're looking at print materials such as newspapers, magazines, advertisements, anything like that, books, you typically are going to see a serif font. It's more traditional and it's easier to read in print. Whereas if you are looking at something that is on a screen, like a computer screen, then you're going to have a sans serif font. So I'm going to find a sans serif font for you. And a good example would be, which is typically a default, is Calibri. So I'm going to write sans serif. And if you look at these two next to each other, you can get an idea of the difference between the two. A serif font has these extra little hooks and pieces, little feet. And what these curves, these extra things are basically an evolution from how type used to be made, which was with a chisel in rock. So what would happen is they would need a way to create the shapes and a way to dig into the rock. So it would start with some sort of tool that they would chisel into the rock, which would allow them to have a place to start from. And that would create these hooks. And eventually those things just became a part of a style. All right, so next up we have typography, serif, sans serif fonts, and we have the display font at the top, which is the typography logo. Another thing I want to show you is a script font. So I'm going to type in the word script, and I am going to highlight that and change it to a script style. And script is considered, in some cases, elegant, and in some cases, it's considered more casual. It could be something that looks more like handwriting, or it could look something more like calligraphy. And calligraphy is also considered a font style, and it's usually a fancier script, but it's basically cursive. So again, this is something you probably wouldn't want to do when you, or a font style you wouldn't want to use if you were doing if you had a lot to read, because sometimes script is a little harder to read. Now, I've shown you some different font types, and you understand, or hopefully will understand, if you look through here, you can pick out some of these styles, and sometimes you'll see the words sans, which indicates it's a sans serif font, or you'll see the word serif sometimes, which will indicate it's a serif font. You can also see if they're bolder or script or anything else. It's usually descriptive in the name. It also will show you the preview to the right. And so I have these different types, and you can see when I have created these layers, you can see we have typography is a display font. The other ones, these are basically showing you what's in the text. So it automatically names your layers, whatever it is you typed in there. Now, up here, along with the other options for text, there is this thing that says strong, and I'll go to typography here to show you this. If you go in here, what this is called aliasing and anti-aliasing, and what they do is basically sometimes your text has a soft edge when you're looking at it on a screen, and sometimes it has more of a hard edge. And so basically what that is doing is it's telling the computer how to render the pixels, whether to make them more smooth or more crisp or more sharp. And I'm just going to choose none for now. A lot of times you're not going to mess with anti-aliasing that much. And if I zoom in, you can see the text here is pretty much got a smooth edge to it. And again, I can change that and make it more crisp, but when you're working with a smaller size, it's not going to even be noticeable. So there's that. And the next thing I want to show you is to the right of that, you have alignment. And what this does is allows you, if you have multiple words on a layer, it allows you to adjust how it's aligned. And another thing I want to show you is this move tool here. When you're working with text, you can drag text by the actual letters if you click on the letters and drag them. And you also get these nifty little guides which will allow you to align things with other text. So this big line here is showing me that I'm centered on the document if I drag it there. And if I drag it to the right a little bit, I can see I'm center aligned with the typography above. And if I go up and down, you can see how it aligns with the word serif next to sans serif. So alignment, you're going to see more in action with writing a whole paragraph. So I will create a layer that, hold on, let me delete this one. I'm going to create a text box layer just so you can see this. And I'm going to have to do some adjusting on kerning and spacing, line spacing, which is also known as leading. I'm going to have to do that in just a minute to show you this. I'll actually decrease the size for now, but the reason we couldn't read it was the spacing was off. Now you can see this is all center aligned so that everything is centered, but if I click on the left one, I can left align and I can right align. There are some more advanced features in other parts of this, but I will show you that later. Alright, so going back to this text options, I'm going to highlight typography for the next thing. I've already chosen blue as like this main color, but if you ever want to make something stand out, and this is something you might do with a display font, you might make it stand out by using a display font in the midst of just a normal sans serif font or some other typical, font. Another way to make it stand out is to change its color. When everything else is blue here, I could make this yellow. And that automatically increases its importance, which is basically in design that's called hierarchy. So you can create a level of importance based on size, you can also create contrast using color. So I can make this be like a heading, and that creates both hierarchy and contrast. It creates hierarchy through the contrast, I should say. Another thing I can do here is there is this warp menu. Oh, I have to, in some cases it's not going to let you do things with the text depending on the type of font it is, and it might have to make an adjustment, but in this case it let me. I got that error message. But the warp text has different types of warps, which are kind of shown in these little thumbnails, and if I click on these, you can kind of see what they do, and they give you different options depending on what it is that you're adjusting. So this is an arc. There's arc lower, which allows you to just kind of bend things down a little bit. And then there's, you can do vertical, horizontal, and if you go through these and just kind of experiment, you can see what each of these effects does and what each of these sliders does, and you can see it previewed live. I'll keep arc lower here. This kind of looks like the Thrasher logo a little bit, where you have the big to small to big. And the next thing I want to show you are basically the panels that are associated with this. Now, if you make a change to text, and this is something you'll see on certification exams, if you've made some changes and you don't like them, you can cancel them with this little Ghostbuster sign looking thing, little circle with the line through it. And you can commit your change by clicking the check mark. There's also the option to do some 3D effects with it. I won't go into that right now. That will come when we talk about 3D. However, what I will show you guys is the character and paragraph panels, which are over here on the right. They were opened by using this icon. You can also access them by going Window, and then you can see Character. You can see Character Styles, which I just opened that one up as well. We don't have anything there yet because I haven't saved any character styles. And there's also paragraph styles. All of these things, and paragraph is right here. All of these things are available as panels. And you can see a lot of the same features that were in the options bar are up here. There's some additional ones that I want to go over that are important to typography in particular. And some of those, we have the font size here, which again, when I showed you how to change the size of font, I showed you could drag it and manually adjust the size. Another thing, though, is when you're creating text, if you have your line spacing really close together, sometimes your text could even overlap if the font size is big and your line spacing is smaller than the font size. Or you could make it hard to read if your text is too close together. It also can look awkward if it's too spaced apart. So if you highlight text, the first thing that we're going to look at here is right here, and that is called leading. It's also, I've heard it pronounced leading, which I think refers to something that is in, type, as in print press type. But just to avoid confusion, we'll call it leading. And if I click on, right now I have a size 18 font and a size 14 point leading, which gives very little space between the lines. So I can adjust it through these numbers here. can even type in a number, or I can manually adjust it. So you can see a preview of what it looks like. So if you wanted something that looked double spaced, you could put double the number in there, which would be 36. Right now it's at 20. That's like about 1.5 times. And personally, I think this is appropriately spaced when it's at the actual font size. So if you have it there, that is neutral. That's normal. Now, if I wanted it to be a little bit more spaced out for whatever purpose, readability, I could do that there. When you have different sizes of text too, you might consider, like, if you had a word that you wanted to stand out, again creating contrast or hierarchy, I should say, I could do that right here, but you have to also consider the leading and how that word might overlap other words. So if you want to have a uniform spacing, you might have to account for different sized words. Now, that's leading. The next thing, so that's up here. I'm circling it with my mouse. It's that right there. The next thing that I'm going to show you is the kerning. And what kerning is the space between two letters. So in here, what you're seeing in my display font here, where these letters are touching each other, that technique is basically creating what's called a gadzuk. And what a gadzuk is, I'll type the word in so you can see gadzuk. It's basically just two letters that are touching each other. So in this case, the two O's, I mean, this is something you might do for, you know, a fun effect or something like, if you've ever seen the FedEx logo, they use a gadzuk between the, I believe it is the E and the X to make the shape of an, or maybe it's the F and X. Let me look it up really quick. I'm going to pull up a window here, and we're going to look at the FedEx logo. And so here's the FedEx logo. Yeah, it's between the E and the X in the last part of the FedEx logo. You'll notice there's an arrow that's formed. It's because these two letters are touching. They are a gadzuk. So gadzuk. Now, in some cases, you want to avoid this. You don't want the letters to touch each other, but you want them to be appropriately spaced. So if you want them to be appropriately spaced, you can do that just by clicking and putting your insertion point between the two letters you want to space and adjusting the kerning. So if you see, I can click on here and choose a number, or I can manually adjust it with a live preview by clicking on it and dragging left and right. So personally, I like to have a little space. Too much space, you know, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's a little bit too much. But a little bit's good. It makes it more readable. Now, if I wanted to adjust the space for every letter on here, I could do that where it has this icon here that lets you adjust the tracking. And tracking is multiple spaces. It allows you to adjust the space between multiple letters, multiple selected letters. And so if I click and hold down my mouse here, I can adjust it just like that. So that's like extra kerning. It's like select plus kerning. So there's those. The other thing I can do is I can adjust the height and width. So if I wanted my letters to be really tall, I could do that by changing this right here. I can make them really short. And so you can do that. You can also make your letters really thin. So you can do some different effects right here with these two. And you'll notice these icons are very descriptive. You'll see with the kerning there is a V and an A, and there's like kind of a slash between it. And that's showing that there's an insertion point indicating space between those two letters. Whereas the next one over is a VA that looks like it's been highlighted. And then the arrows here show that it can either be taller or smaller or wider or thinner. Alright, so the next thing I want to show you guys is how you can adjust the baseline. So some cases, like if I was to type in, I'm going to just do like a number here. So I'll do like third. Like if I wanted to make the RD raised up, like you might see when you normally would make the number 3 and then add an RD to make it third, then what you can do is adjust the baseline down here. And right now the baseline is set at 5 points. And now if I drag that up, if I click and drag to the right, I can make that raise up relative to the 3. But what I can also do is what I'm going to show you next. So I'm going to put this back where it was at 5 points. And if you look down here, you'll see these are the different styles. So we got faux bold, we have italic, we have all caps, we have small caps. So you can do, like, if you did a capital R, it would be a bigger cap, and then the lowercase r would be a small uppercase r. You can also do this superscript, which that is what I was about to say would be a good match. You can also adjust the baseline with that as well. Do superscript, and then there's subscript, which allows you to lower smaller amounts of text. And then there's underline, which I rarely see people use in Photoshop, and strike through, which I rarely see people use in Photoshop. So those are all the available things. There's some other things in here which usually only occur with symbols, some different things that relate to symbols and stuff like that, and different keyboard types and different language preferences. So that's character. I'm going to go down to paragraph to show you the next thing. The paragraph panel allows you to do the alignment just like we did in the other thing. Also allows you to adjust justification. So justify last left basically makes all your text space out perfectly to fit an entire text box, and then the last line, if it's a little shorter, just ends where it ends. And centered basically does the same thing, except it centers that last line of text. And then right justifies everything, but keeps it on the last one, just to the right. Now if I do justify all, this is why you would normally do first, because if you have a shorter number of words, it looks kind of awkward when it's that spaced out. So I'm going to put it back on left align. Now indentation is also available in here, and the only time you'd really use indentation is if you had like multiple paragraphs or anything like that. You could tab over and whatnot, and you can set these indentation margins on all sides here. You can say I want it to be 4.5 pixels in from the left of the text box and whatever. And then there's also these, which I don't know if we'll be able to adjust. Let me try it again. No, it's not letting me. And what these are, they allow you to put a space in front of paragraphs and after. But in my case, I don't know if we're going to see anything with that. But anyways, that's paragraph. And that's pretty much everything with the panels. Now, I'm not going to show you paragraph styles or character styles because we'll deal with that at some other point. But I am going to show you the type menu. A few things from that. Now, those panels that we just accessed are all here. If you ever want to access certain symbols that are in a font, you can go to the glyphs panel, and that will show you every single letter that has been created for that font, including symbols. And you'll see there are lots of symbols with this font. So if you're typing something that's, in another language or handwriting or whatever, or another writing style, then you'll want to access the glyphs to get those symbols. You can also, if you go to type, we saw the glyphs. You can get those paragraph and character styles. You can change orientation between horizontal and vertical. Let me show you what happens with that. This is why I was talking about stacked text. Now, with a paragraph, you definitely don't want to do that, but yeah, it's not an ideal tool for anybody to use, but that's how you can switch between it on there. And there's a few other things I'm not going to go into because it's not as relevant to what we're doing. One thing I will show you is Rasterize type layer. With this, I have currently a text layer, which is considered a vector, which I can resize and it won't lose quality because it's a vector. It basically is just using the same mathematical information to render all the shapes of the letters and everything. However, if you rasterize it, if you need to do something to it, like actually go in and like use an eraser on part of your text, you can't really do that. It gives you the little circle with the line through it if you try to do it using like the eraser tool. However, if you go to Type and then go to Rasterize Type Layer, now I can go through, and if I wanted some sort of effect where I am making some text like disappear, if I wanted to erase part of the text or something like that, or for instance, if I had a picture and I had some text I put on it and I wanted to make it look like an object in the picture was overlapping the text, I could do that using the eraser if I have rasterized it. There aren't too many reasons I would use that otherwise, but that's basically how that tool works. Alright, or how that function works. So it's why you would want to rasterize. If you keep your text as is, another way to deal with making some of it not appear is using what's called a mask, and that is in a different video. So we'll deal with that at some other point. So other things on the type thing, you can change the font preview size. This just basically is for your view at the top there to show you a preview of your text. And there's some other things with that which I'm not going to go into. But this is essentially everything you need to know about typography and the type tools in Photoshop.